It was 11 o'clock at night, and the rain in East Portland wasn't just falling. It was punishing the roof, drowning out the few cars passing by on the slick street. I stood on the porch of the house I'd grown up in, my cheap coat soaked through in seconds, shivering not just from the cold but from the shock of what was happening in front of me. A locksmith, a guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, was drilling into the front door, the screech of metal on metal louder than the storm. And on the other side of the glass, warm and dry in the foyer light, stood Cynthia, my stepmother. She wasn't crying. She wasn't mourning the husband she'd just buried hours ago. He was smiling. A small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. In one hand she held a glass of wine. In the other she held my suitcase, the one I'd packed for the funeral weekend. She didn't open the door. She just held up the bag like a trophy, then pointed to the street. I could read her lips perfectly through the rain-streaked glass. The free ride is over. You're trespassing. Before I tell you exactly what she found in that suitcase later, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I didn't beg. I didn't scream. I just stood there in the rain, staring at Cynthia until every detail of her cruelty was etched into my memory. The expensive wine glass in her hand. The way she smirked when a gust of wind blew rain into my face. The absolute terrifying certainty in her eyes that she had won. He thought I was weak. She thought I would collapse right there on the porch and plead for mercy. But she didn't know me. Not really. She didn't know that for the past 6 months, I hadn't been just grieving my dying father. I had been preparing. I picked up my wet suitcase, the handles slick with rain, and turned my back on the house. I walked to my car, a beat-up sedan that had seen better days, parked crookedly on the street because Hunter had blocked the driveway with his new truck. I threw my bag in the back seat, climbed into the driver's seat and locked the doors. The sound of the rain was deafening inside the car, a relentless drumming that matched the pounding of my heart. But my hands were steady. I reached across to the glove compartment and opened it. Inside, buried under old registration papers and a tire gauge, was a thick manila envelope. On the front, in my father's shaky, dying handwriting, were 4 words: for the rainy day. I traced the letters with my thumb, feeling the texture of the paper, the weight of the promise inside. I didn't open it. Not yet. I knew what was inside and I knew exactly what to do with it. I started the engine, the headlights cutting through the dark, wet street, and drove away. I didn't go to a friend's house. I didn't go to a hotel. I drove straight to a 24-hour diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where truckers and insomniacs went to disappear. I ordered a black coffee, opened my laptop, and connected to the spotty Wi-Fi. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had memorized months ago. It rang once. Twice. "Richard," I said when he answered, my voice calm, cold, and completely devoid of the tears Cynthia had been hoping for. "It's time. Are you safe?" Richard asked immediately. He was my father's oldest friend, his lawyer, and the only other person in the world who knew the truth. "I'm safe," I said, looking at the envelope on the table next to my coffee. "She kicked me out. Just like he said she would." "Then we execute the plan," Richard said. "Meet me at my office at 8 a.m. sharp. Bring the envelope." "I'll be there," I said. I hung up and took a sip of the bitter coffee. Tasted like fuel. I opened a new document on my laptop and started typing. Not a diary entry. Not a letter. A list. A timeline. Every bill I had paid. Every lie Cynthia had told. Every dollar Hunter had stolen. I wasn't writing a sob story. I was building a case. And as I typed, the shivering finally stopped. This wasn't grief anymore. It was work. I spent the next 2 hours waiting for the sun to rise, staring at the cursor blinking on my screen. I wasn't just killing time. I was revisiting the past 4 years, dissecting every memory with a new clinical precision. I thought about the utilities I'd paid while Cynthia bought designer shoes she never wore. I thought about the groceries I'd quietly stocked in the fridge so Hunter wouldn't go hungry, even as he mocked my cheap nursing scrubs. 4 years I had been the invisible infrastructure of that house. I was the silent partner in a business called The Family, except I wasn't a partner. I was a resource. A line item in Cynthia's mental budget that she could draw from whenever she pleased. My father had known. He had watched it happen from his armchair, his breath rattling in his chest, his eyes full of an apology he never spoke out loud. We had a silent agreement, he and I. He knew Cynthia was a parasite. He knew she viewed people not as human beings, but as assets or liabilities. To her, a husband wasn't a partner. He was an income stream. A stepdaughter wasn't family. She was an overhead cost to be minimized or a labor force to be exploited. And when my father's heart finally gave out, Cynthia didn't see a tragedy. She saw a transaction closing. She saw a portfolio maturing. She saw me, the overhead cost, becoming obsolete. That realization didn't hurt anymore. It clarified everything. Cynthia wasn't evil in a theatrical way. She was just delusional. She suffered from the profound arrogance of the parasite who believes they are the host. She thought she deserved the house, the money, the life simply because she existed. She thought she could erase me because she had never truly seen me. To her, I was just a wallet that had stopped dispensing cash. But wallets don't fight back. Wallets don't hire lawyers. And wallets certainly don't keep detailed records of every single cent they've been drained of. I closed the document. The sun was coming up over the gray horizon, painting the wet parking lot in dull silver. I checked my bank account on my phone. The numbers were tight but sufficient. I had been saving for a rainy day since I was 16. Well, it was pouring now. I packed up my laptop, paid for my coffee with exact change, and walked out to my car. The fear was gone. The grief was packed away in a box in my mind labeled later. Right now I had an appointment with a shark. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in premature celebration. I didn't go near the house, but I didn't have to. Cynthia and Hunter lived their lives online, broadcasting every thought and impulse as if the internet were their personal diary. While I was sleeping on a friend's couch, organizing legal files, Cynthia was busy curating the image of the grieving widow on Facebook. She posted a photo of herself in a black veil, captioning it with a long, rambling paragraph about unimaginable loss and the burden of carrying on alone. It got 300 likes in an hour. But 5 minutes later, on Marketplace, Hunter posted my father's Ford F-150. For sale. Cash only. No title, bill of sale. He was selling my father's truck before the body was even cold. They weren't just grieving, they were liquidating. They were stripping the carcass. I watched it all from my laptop screen in the back of the diner. It was fascinating in a morbid way. They were moving with the reckless confidence of people who believed they had just won the lottery. I saw the credit card notifications. My father's cards, which Cynthia still had access to. A $3,000 charge for a grief and healing retreat at a luxury spa in Napa. $2,000 at a high-end furniture store. $500 at a steakhouse. They were running up a tab on a dead man's credit, banking on a payday that didn't exist. They were convinced that the workers' compensation settlement from the accident was a done deal. They had done the math in their heads. $350,000 for a workplace fatality. To them, it was already in the bank. They didn't know that my father had quit that job 4 months ago because his health was failing. They didn't know he was technically unemployed when he died. They were spending a ghost's money. Then came the text from Hunter. It popped up on my screen at noon on Tuesday, aggressive and misspelled. Don't even think about showing up for the reading of the will. Mom is the primary beneficiary on everything. You get nothing. Stay away or I call the cops. I stared at the message. Primary beneficiary. He typed it with such authority. He truly believed that biology and proximity trumped legal documentation. He thought that because they had bullied my father in life they could bully his estate in death. I didn't reply. I didn't warn them. I didn't tell them that selling a vehicle without a title was a felony or that the credit card debt they were racking up would eventually be billed to an estate that was about to be declared insolvent. I let them dig. Every dollar they spent was another shovelful of dirt. Every public post was another piece of evidence. They were building a monument to their own greed, and all I had to do was wait for the cement to dry. I closed my laptop and took a sip of water. The anger was still there, sitting heavy in my chest, but it was cold now. It was manageable. I had a meeting with Richard tomorrow. I had the envelope. I had the truth. Let them enjoy the spa. Let them eat the steak. It was the last expensive meal they were ever going to have. Wednesday morning arrived with a sky the color of a bruise. I pulled into the parking lot of Richard's law firm 10 minutes early. I was wearing a simple black dress and the only jewelry I owned, a small silver locket my mother had given me before she passed. I didn't look like a millionaire. I looked like exactly what Cynthia thought I was. The help. When I entered the conference room, the grieving widow was already there. Cynthia had clearly gone shopping. She was wearing a black designer suit that probably cost more than my car, and Hunter was squeezed into a blazer that still had the crease lines from the packaging. They sat on one side of the mahogany table, looking like they were waiting for a coronation. Richard sat at the head of the table. He didn't smile. He nodded at me, gestured to the chair opposite them and opened a file. Let's make this brief, Cynthia said, checking her watch. I have an appointment at noon. Just give us the workers' compensation check and the deed transfer papers, and we can be done with her. She waved a dismissive hand in my direction without even looking at me. Richard adjusted his glasses. There is no workers' compensation check, Cynthia. The room went silent. Cynthia's hand froze mid-wave. Excuse me. Frank wasn't employed at the time of his death, Richard said, his voice level and professional. He resigned from the construction firm 4 months ago. His health was failing and he didn't want to be a liability on the site. Since he wasn't an employee, there is no workplace accident settlement. You're lying, Hunter spat. He went to work every day. He went to the library, I said quietly. He sat in his truck and read because he didn't want you to know he was too sick to work. He didn't want to hear you complain about the money. Cynthia turned on me, her eyes narrowing into slits. Shut up. You know nothing. Richard fixed this. We have expenses. I'm sure you do, Richard said. However, Frank did have a private life insurance policy. A significant one. He purchased it 20 years ago and maintained the premiums religiously. Cynthia relaxed, letting out a breath she'd been holding. A greedy smile touched her lips. Well, that's a relief. How much? $1,500,000, Richard said. Hunter let out a low whistle. Cynthia practically vibrated. Hey, that's acceptable. Write the check to Cynthia Henderson. I can't do that, Richard said. Why not? Because you aren't the beneficiary. Cynthia stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. I am his wife. I am the primary beneficiary on everything. Richard slid a document across the table. The insurance names a single beneficiary. Sabrina Henderson. Cynthia exploded, accusing Sabrina of fraud and coercion, vowing to contest it. Richard cut her off. Frank had anticipated this. He'd left a letter to be read only if she challenged the policy. In it, Frank revealed he knew about Cynthia's gambling, her pawning his grandfather's watch, and her fixation on money. He explained he'd hidden his illness because he knew she would see his death as liquidation. He left the insurance to Sabrina because she cared about him, not his income. It wasn't betrayal. It was protection. Cynthia stormed up, declaring she didn't need the insurance. She had the house worth $600,000 and planned to sell it. But Richard stopped her. Frank had severed the joint tenancy months earlier. The house was now held as tenants in common. 50% Cynthia, 50% Sabrina. Cynthia scoffed and threatened to force a sale. Richard calmly revealed the final blow. A $450,000 private loan secured against the house. The signature was forged. Cynthia had taken it out herself. Because the tenancy was severed, the debt attached only to her half. Her share was worth $300,000, and deeply underwater. The bank accelerated the loan and foreclosed on Cynthia's portion alone. At the courthouse auction 2 weeks later, no one wanted a half interest with a hostile co-owner. When the bank opened bidding at $450,000, I bid $451,000. Sold. I bought Cynthia's half with a fraction of the insurance money, purchasing her out with her own debt. She begged to stay. I told her she was trespassing and handed her an umbrella as she waited for an Uber. Back in the house, it no longer felt oppressive. It felt quiet. Free. The house wasn't the prize. The money wasn't either. The prize was peace. Sometimes you have to stop trying to build a home inside people who only bring storms. You are the architect, and you are allowed to evict anyone who threatens your foundation. I locked the door not to keep people out but to keep my peace in.